you everyone for joining me today, and I'm very, very, very blessed to have as my special guest Bishop Joseph Strickland of Tyler, Texas. Thank you, Bishop.
Thank you, Joseph.
Thank you. I think it's providence that I'm recording this today on the feast of Our Lady of the Rosary, because
Yeah,
I owe my life to the Rosary. When I was living a very desolate life, my father prayed four mysteries, not 4 decades, four mysteries of the Rosary every day, twice a day.
really.
Yeah, so we're talking like over 400 Hail Marys. And yeah, I had no idea. And I think that was the thing that saved me from the life I was
Great,
living. So
great.
yeah.
Well, Mary's saved a few of us.
Yeah, tell me, yeah. I still I try to pray the rosary every day. Sometimes I mess up, but I always try to remember her at least. That
Well, you can pray it twice on some days and make up for the days you miss.
I know my dad prayed so many. Bishop Strickland, the first time I became aware of you was really, aware of you was in 2018 at the USCCB conference there in Baltimore.
Yeah,
And the issue of, I should say, the issue of homosexuality in the church, and it's really been kind of my life's work. It's more than a pastoral or a doctrinal issue. It's a very life and death issue for me, because I still have people that I love that are involved
yeah,
in that mess. Yeah.
yeah,
So at that 2018 conference in Baltimore, uh, you went outside to where some Catholics had met, and there were pre-sex abuse survivors there as well that had met, and you went and joined them and prayed with them,
yeah,
and that impressed me. And I have often thought that what would have happened if all of the bishops at that meeting that year would have done the same thing. I mean, how different the Catholic Church in America would be today.
yeah. I think it was just actually the story was people asked me from the diocese. They just heard these people were going to be there, and they asked me, why don't you go and visit with them? And honestly, I had no idea who they were, really. And some of the scuttlebutt was, oh, you gotta be careful, the protesters out there. I mean, it was like visiting people on the porch of the cathedral before Mass. I mean, little kids, parents, grandparents, single people, families. I mean, it was like a parish gathering, and very mild mannered. People, deeply concerned, and they did have some victims that were speaking and all. And of course, that was right in the midst of the latest chapter, sadly, of all the abuse crisis. But it it really didn't feel like any extraordinary step that I was taking. I mean, I knew I didn't see a lot of other bishops out there, but I was just doing what my flock asked me to do, So, and I think it's easy to forget with all the things going on in society since then.
Yeah.
The past 2 years have been a lot of turmoil. But I think we need to just remember that basic humanity. As you were saying, we are precious in the eyes of God, every single one of us. And I think we need to just take a breath and remember that person that we're in some kind of contentious situation with, they are precious in the eyes of God. And that doesn't mean we're all right or that people don't do, bad things. But even those who do bad things are precious in the eyes of God. And I think if we can remember that and live that way, I mean, Christ says, love your enemies. And it's so easy to get those lines of demarcation that these are with us and these are against us. And certainly we're facing a lot of that with this election that's coming up. And it's it's more than sad, it's tragic to see the way people are divided and the way we forget that basic humanity, that we're all children of God.
Right. I don't want to talk about the election. I got a contentious of enough issue here, which is homosexuality.
Yeah,
I don't want to do too.
yeah,
So,
I
but
understand.
you made a pretty remarkable statement at the 2018 USCCB meeting. And I read some of the Catholic media reporting on it, and they they took some things out of context that you said, and they excerpted things that you said. And so I kind of wanted to go back and look at actually the full clip of what you said, and I did that. So I was hoping you could kind of unpack it with me what you said. But if you indulge me just for like a minute, I'd like to
Sure.
just a little bit of background about what you were saying, just so people understand. Um, I would say, Bishop, nowhere is there such a wide chasm between official Catholic Church teaching and what's going on in the parishes than with the issue of homosexuality. It's pretty huge. And I'm going to read you just some, and for our listeners too, these are some headlines from my blog, because I had never intended to write or research or investigate the issue of homosexuality in the Catholic Church. I didn't have really any interest in it, although I'd lived a gay life for most of my life. Um, but people started contacting me and saying, we have an issue in our parish. There's an LGBT ministry, and there's this and that. Would you look into it? What do you know about it? And I did. So these are some of the headlines of articles that I had on my blog. OFM parish promotes queer Christ. Archdiocese of Los Angeles Church screens pro-gay marriage film. Jesuit pastor says the Bible does not prohibit loving gay relationships. Gay ex-monk heads Archdiocese of Portland dissident LGBT ministry. Archdiocese of New York LGBT ministry. GBTQ relationships embody love and witness God's presence in our world today. Dissident pro-gay marriage ministry to offer LGBT retreat in the Diocese of San Diego. Pro-gay ministry to hold retreat at Chancery of the Archdiocese of Atlanta. James Martin's favorite LGBT ministry asks Pope to change the catechism. Archdiocese of Chicago co-chair of Catholic LGBT ministry to wed same-sex partner. Drag queen in charge of Archdiocese of New York LGBT ministry puts on a wig in front of the tabernacle. Archdiocese of New York LGBT ministry holds meeting in gay drag bar. Jesuits holding pro-LGBTQ retreat. Paulist priest says Christ is lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and queer. Organizer of LGBT pilgrimage to Newark Cathedral is gay married man. Archdiocese of New York parish plans gay pride mass at Stonewall. Sorry, Bishop.
That's quite a litany.
Oh, I could be here all day.
Oh, I'm sure.
Those are kind of like the greatest hits. I was wondering if you could go over with me too, with my listeners, the CDF document from 1986. I know you're familiar with that. It was the one on the letter to the bishops of the Catholic Church on the pastoral care of homosexual persons. It's kind of famous today because it included the term intrinsically disordered.
Yeah.
But that's the way people that's the reason why people often refer to that 86 document. But when I look at it, I'm curious to what you think too, is that it's really a dead serious admonition to the bishops to be very wary of these LGBT ministries. And this was in 1986. That were already popping up at parishes and dioceses. And this is what that CDF document says. This is one of the things it says. It says, this congregation wishes to ask the bishops to be especially cautious of any programs which may seek to pressure the church to change her teaching, even while claiming not to do so. While their members may claim a desire to conform their lives to the teachings of Jesus, In fact, they abandon the teachings of his church. This contradictory action should not have the support of the bishops in any way. Now, at that time, they were primarily, I think, talking about dignity, which almost every major archdiocese in the United States, if there was a parish near a predominantly gay neighborhood, it had a dignity chapter.
Yeah.
And it was saying, no more.
Yeah. Well, and I think that teaching really, and I know, people push against it, and I mean, there's just this movement to, as you said, change the teaching. The church can change reality. I mean, it's just the truth. And I think that as I listen to you, Joseph, what occurs to me is this is one of the ways that the sexual revolution is just swept over humanity. And certainly it's not just in this country, it's around the world. My mother's from Sydney, Australia. She's deceased, but I've been to Sydney a number of times. Australia is maybe more affected by this than the United States, or certainly equally, and most countries are. But it's a false compassion that distorts the truth. Certainly, and I've tried to be very clear. Certainly, the bigotry that has happened in the past, in the ways that people have been denigrated because of a sexual orientation, but all of that doesn't mean that you embrace, what's disordered. Really, it's interesting because I know there is a campaign to take out disordered, or it's too harsh. It's just speaking of the reality that needs to be faced, and needs to be faced with compassion. Honestly, and I know that a lot of people, I'm sure, think that, this Bishop Strickland is really just out there. Really very simple. And I think it's so simple for me that a lot of people just say, that you can't embrace that. But really, what I would encourage is that we begin to look at every act of sexual intimacy outside marriage is disordered. I've had talking to homosexual people, or some of the LGBTQ, however many letters there are, spectrum, and I think they're correct, that we do have to be careful with the morality, that we don't forget the heterosexual couple that are just popping in and out of bed with each other and a different person every night, or just deciding to live together until they decide not to. That's disordered as well.
Yeah.
Pornography is disordered.
I don't think that. Yeah, Bishop, I don't think the church, if I mean like priests in the parish, I don't think they discuss any of these sexual issues, gay, straight, any of them.
Yeah.
Porn.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's very.
I think it's sometimes if someone from the LGBT community makes that claim, well, the church doesn't talk about, heterosexual disordered relationships. It doesn't talk about the gay or the straight.
Yeah. Well, you're right. I mean, it's almost like the other side of the sexual revolution, as things have gotten more and more freed up, the church has said less and less. I mean, I remember in the seminary, people saying, the Catholic Church is so anti-sex. But actually, if you look at Catholic teaching, it embraces what God's intention is. And certainly, we have to acknowledge that we live in many ways, a godless culture. Certainly the prevailing culture is godless. And so to say God's intention, a lot of people just kind of laugh that off. I mean, I'm sure you can imagine some of the reactions I get when I highlight something on a tweet, with the whole issue of the LGBTQ agenda, is when I do that, they just blast me with all kinds of things. And of course, one of the things that people say
You're the only
is,
one doing it. That's why. I mean, you're the
well,
only one. I mean, who else are they going to blast? So you're
yeah,
you're it.
yeah. But they will, always say, well, you just want this because then you can abuse more little boys. And
Oh,
thankfully, I can stand before you and God and everybody else. I mean, I never abused a little boy, never had a desire to abuse a little boy. And
yeah.
certainly that is disordered. That is tragic. That abuse reality, which, we have to keep in perspective, is part of society. It happens in families and all, but that's what people throw at me. And I think it does make bishops shy about speaking up because, yeah, they can throw that at us, but it still doesn't mean it's like, well, they can make these accusations, so I'm not going to speak the truth. Frankly, I think we still have the obligation to speak the truth and
Thank
to,
you.
to speak up. And it, for whatever reasons, I am this oddball, but I'll continue to be an oddball until they take my
Thank you.
voice,
Thank you.
because the world needs it. The world needs the message of the church. It's a beautiful, loving message. It's not this hate mongering, bigoted, antiquated institution that people say it is. It's just not.
No. Yeah. I mean, I mentioned that CDF document and the chasm between official Catholic teaching and what's going on pastorally. Because if you just look at this group called New Ways Ministry, I don't know if you're familiar with it, but I mean, it's been condemned by the church twice.
Yeah.
In 99, after over 20-year investigation into the founders in the group, the Vatican issued a notification on the two founders. And then in 2010, the USCCB under Cardinal George condemned the group again. But there are still bishops and still priests who publicly support this ministry.
Oh yeah. Yeah. And it's just not what the church teaches. And I really believe it is a false compassion. It looks friendly in the moment, but as you've experienced, for the long term of life, it encourages people to just go down a fractured path that just becomes more fractured. There's plenty of fracture even in marriages and people living the male female heterosexual lifestyle. There's plenty of fracture in that because of disrespect for the male or the female in the picture. I mean, there are tons of issues, but to start with disordered, it's just logical. It's going to become more disordered, and it's not kindness to say walk down this path. And the nation embracing gay marriage, it's not marriage, and it can look like that for a while. But I mean, I saw something. I mean, it just sort of. I continue to be surprised at what we see in culture. The German bishops, which
Yeah.
I actually wrote, who am I? Where's Tyler, Texas? But I'm a bishop. And so just out of love of the church, I mean, I wrote a letter to all the archbishops of Germany saying, please
Thank you.
pull back from this synodal way that they're on. But, they probably did. It probably went in file 13 as soon as they saw Strickland, like, get rid of that. That's trash. But just recently I read that the German bishops and all their, massaging of things are coming out with something about the fruitfulness or the fertility. I think they use the word fertility of gay couples. And it's like, what? I mean, how are two men sexually together going to be fertile? I mean, it's non-scientific, it's non-human, it's not reality. But I just saw the headline. I don't know what they're trying to argue to say.
Yeah, they don't. Yeah, they don't look at it as biologically fertile, but as emotionally fertile, and in terms of love. Everything's in terms of emotion.
Yeah,
So
but well, then they don't need to get physical. Just be emotional. If
well,
that's the level, I mean, it's just it really is a disconnect with reality that I don't claim to be a very effective apologist for what the church teaches, because it's just so bonkers to me. I mean, it just doesn't work. I grew up on a farm. You don't have two bulls in the barnyard and get a calf. You just don't. It just doesn't happen. The wisdom of the church came to the point where, certainly the the gift of our sexual nature is not only procreation. There is the unitive aspect of a man and a woman coming together in the intimacy of marriage, but it's both and they're, like I said, I think the sexual revolution, and you probably would maybe question, but I really think a lot of what we're facing is rooted in what happened with Humanae Vitae.
yeah,
I mean, you mentioned these documents from the Vatican saying, be careful about these ministries that are promoting the gay lifestyle or other differentiations of the gay lifestyle. But what happened with Humanae Vitae when Pope Paul VI in 1968? I was 10 years old.
wow,
But when that was rejected, really, there were bishops in the United States who wrote letters, and it was rejected. And certainly when the bishops rejected it, the people said, great, we can use contraception. The Pope's crazy. And I think that is the root. I mean, that was a huge part of the sexual revolution. Prior to that, the pill had been made available in the early 1960s.
yeah,
And it kind of goes back to so many other aspects in our society today. Just because we can doesn't mean we should.
right.
And because you can use a pill to manipulate a woman's biological rhythms and all of that, her physiology can be manipulated so that she's not fertile. But even, I mean, I've been to seminars where they talk about that's not good for women, just on that issue, to be taking these chemicals that are altering their natural rhythms of their body. It's just not good for them. And so, I mean, there's so much talk about women's rights and all of this, and absolutely, women have rights as men have rights. But and like I said, I mean, it probably sounds so simplistic that a lot of people just laugh, but
Okay.
God loves us all and he wants us to flourish. But ignoring God's plan, I mean, just look at where the world is. Are we flourishing because we've ignored God's plan? I don't think a lot of people would say that.
No. No, I mean, pharmaceuticals keep a lot of this stuff going. I mean, in the gay male community, I mean, just up to a decade ago, the HIV rates were just through the roof. But then they introduced something called Truvada or PrEP, which is like the gay male equivalent of the pill. You got to take it every day, and it is effective in lowering the risk of contracting HIV. But now they're seeing all these side effects.
Mm.
And there's class action lawsuits. So it's like, it doesn't work. You can't fool nature.
Yeah. Yeah.
Back to that 1986 document. I just want to say that I think what happened is, although the Vatican was dead serious and telling the bishops to expel these ministries, these pro-LGBTQ ministries, there was kind of a sleight of hand, because I've done research into this. One particular incident I found was with Cardinal Bernardine in Chicago, where the leadership of Dignity that was in the parishes in Chicago, they were retained. And then it was a rebranding. And then in Chicago, they rebranded it AGLO, which is an Archdiocesan Gay and Lesbian Outreach. It's still there. It's still functioning under the auspices of the Archdiocese. But it was founded by the people from Dignity with the same set of beliefs and objectives. It was a sleight of hand.
Yeah.
And it also happened in other dioceses. In LA, you have the CMLGP, which is still there, Catholic Ministry for Lesbian and Gay Persons. And then the Jesuits came up with this Ignatian Q, which is it's essentially Dignity, but rebranded. So it was a way to get around it. And then there was a Jesuit, I'm taking a deep dive with the bishop. In 2017, a Jesuit up at Regis College in Toronto gave a lecture on all of this history of LGBT movement in the church. And he did say that there was a Cardinal Gerald Carter in Toronto who sent a letter to a bishop, a priest in Toronto, and said, continue to welcome Dignity, but do it in a discreet fashion.
Yeah.
So it's it was a very underhanded way of following the directives and absolutely not following the directives.
Yeah. Well, I would call it corruption, and there's tons of that. With an agenda that wasn't what the church teaches, but a personal agenda that, too many bishops just ran with and really pushed in very significant ways, that we're reaping, the benefit of that now, of that manipulation of the truth, and that it pervades so many different areas, but certainly in the area of, same-sex attraction and homosexuality, and really guiding people in a healthy way. Absolutely. I mean, and that's where I think we're in a time where a lot of language, I mean, it sounds good to have a ministry to gay and lesbian Catholics, to certainly to reach out to, but it's not a ministry when you don't bring them the truth.
No.
And to just say, you're okay where you are. It's
a social club sponsored by a priest that's affirming.
Yeah.
That's what it does. Before I get, and I want to get to what you said at the 2018 USCCB conference. I looked at the USCCB's program of priestly formation on their website, and it's the 5th edition. And it didn't say much about homosexuality, but this is what it did say. It said, with regard to the admission of candidates with same-sex experiences and or inclinations, the guidelines provided by the Holy See must be followed. That's what they said. And the guidelines from the Holy See from 2005 says the church cannot admit to the seminary or to holy orders those who practice homosexuality, present deep-seated homosexual tendencies, or support the so-called gay culture. That's pretty expansive there.
Yeah.
So no, what? Well, I think that this directive from the Vatican has been treated by a lot of bishops in the same way as that 1986 CDF document. How can we get around it?
Yeah.
I've seen these so-called LGBT ministries where if they're sponsored by a religious order, they actually recruit within these ministries for the priesthood.
Yeah, yeah. Well,
Yeah.
It doesn't surprise me. There is that whole agenda, and we're just seeing the fruit of that, and it is not healthy. It is not constructive for the church or for society in general. So, it's an interesting time that we happen to be living through, and it's sort of the whirlwind of the sexual revolution. And there are many aspects of it, but focusing on the church is right. Those teachings are life-giving, freeing people from a disordered path.
But they're not reaching the intended audience, or on the way, they're being completely subverted.
Yeah. And sadly,
Yeah, it's almost to the point where they become useless. Where I mean, it's written on paper, but if it's not reaching the person intended,
yeah.
what good is it? I just wanted to make you aware of one thing too. This was in 2011. There was a priest. He's quite well known within LGBT Catholic circles, John Dufel, and he was at Blessed Sacrament in New York City. And a gay man, and he said this publicly, a gay man asked him about a vocation to the priesthood, and Dufel said, "You're not broken, the system is broken, and therefore you deal with it as a broken system, you lie." So he's telling this young gay man to lie in order to get into the priesthood. Now, in 2019, Dufel was indefinitely suspended from priestly ministry following an accusation of sexual misconduct. And it made me so angry because this small minority of us who follow this LGBT movement in the church had been warning the Archbishop in New York about this particular priest for years, about his pro-gay stance, and nothing.
Well, and
nothing.
It's called subterfuge, is what he was pushing. Just sleight of hand. It's not the truth, and it's sadly harmful to a lot of people. There's just a lot of harm that gets done when you're not honest and you're not truthful.
The bishop, the Vatican said, do not ordain someone who is supportive of the gay culture. Now, what do you do with a priest who's already been ordained and he's very out and loud about supporting the gay culture? What on earth do you do?
Well, I think you discipline him, and that's what I think that's what a bishop should do. And
the person's the priest superior or the local ordinary. They need to do it.
Yeah, I mean that's the responsibility that you have. And what I always try to emphasize to people is that's the greatest charity, is to bring someone to the truth. That is charity, to bring someone to the truth. The problem is, like one of the things I've said on the floor of the U.S. Bishops' Conference, do we believe this or not?
I'm going to get to that.
And the answer is no. Too many don't believe it. They just don't believe it.
I was going to ask you that. So that was my big lead up to the context of what you said at the USCCB in 2018. You said, I'm quoting you, Bishop, the whole McCarrick reality. How did that happen? If we really believe what was going on was wrong. And I think that's a core issue. Thank you. Because, I've made the connection between LGBT advocacy in the church. And strangely, a lot of these prelates who were whirling around McCarrick and involved in all of this, and also the ones that Vigano had mentioned, Archbishop Vigano, are LGBT advocates. Yeah. So there's a connection here between do you believe what the church teaches about homosexuality and the McCarrick scandal? And you connected it in one sentence there.
Yeah. Well, and like I said, I'm a pretty simple guy. I mean, and it's not rocket science. It's just if you believe it, then you've got to address it. And I pray for Theodore McCarrick. I mean, I think he needs our prayers. I pray that, from what I understand, I don't really know the man. I probably met him or saw him at some meeting somewhere along the way, but we need to pray for him. He is a son of God, and he's not on the planet forever. We need to pray that he's done a lot of damage. I've talked to his victims. I've talked to different people.
I know you have. I've talked to them too. Yeah.
And he is not a monster. He's a son of God. He's a human being, and we all need to. I seek ongoing conversion myself. I'm a sinner, thankfully growing, away from my sinful tendencies. I like to go through the 7 deadly sins. Maybe that's not the way to say it, but that's a good examination of conscience. just go through all 7 of the deadly sins. They are deadly.
Yeah.
And it's not just lust, but that's a significant one. Greed, gluttony.
I don't disagree with you. I rarely disagree with you, Bishop, but yeah, I have a hard time dealing, not just because I'm a pre-sex abuse survivor myself, but the type of manipulation and evil that these men employ
Yeah.
is quite irredeemable,
Yeah.
because they are taking a trust that's been given to them by God and using it for the most
Well, and I think,
sadistic purposes.
yeah,
I just don't know how you could get sicker than that. But
yeah. Well, diabolical is an appropriate word.
yeah,
I
very,
think
very appropriate.
diabolical. And again, I mean, certainly what uh, Theodore McCarrick did in so many, I mean, his tentacles are everywhere,
Oh my
from
God.
China to
Yep.
South America, everywhere. And what he did is atrocious. I mean, we've seen the horrible repercussions of his choices. And I think what
And
we've,
yeah, and the silence of those who knew.
yeah.
Because
Well, in the,
I don't buy the argument that very few knew or no one knew. I don't buy it for one
yeah.
second. Just
Well, and,
because, yeah, just because my involvement with the church in the last 20 years, I kind of know the way things work, and people tend to know quite a bit.
sure. Well, especially people that were in a very close circle there. And I think that's why the McCarrick report hasn't come out,
Exactly.
because there are too many people implicated. I mean, it doesn't, again, take rocket science to understand that. Um, to me, just taking an analogously, when JFK was president, John Fitzgerald Kennedy was president, people knew that he was a sexaholic. I mean, he was a sex maniac. I mean, that's
But
documented
yeah,
now.
the male journalists certainly
People
knew.
knew that, but they didn't talk about it because, he had these wonderful qualities, but, he was, I always remember, and to me, without getting into the politics, but Jackie Kennedy is quoted as saying, they're getting after Jack for being a Catholic. He's such a bad Catholic. So leave him alone was her message, basically. He's such a bad Catholic. I think, we could say the same in today's world. And that's as far as I'll go down that path. But, it's the same thing, like you're saying. People knew what McCarrick was up to. Certainly I didn't, you didn't, but there were people
I heard,
closer to his circle did know.
yeah, I actually heard things just because I know a lot of people in that LGBT circle. So there were rumors, yeah, for a long time.
And to say we didn't know anything, and some have been just caught lying. I mean, that's just the reality, untruth, but that's called a lie. Some of them have been just clearly caught, but part of the corruption that's, in so many aspects of society, it's certainly in the church. And again, to remember as a pastor, I hope and pray all of those men that, and like Archbishop Vigano, I mean, part of his motivation, he said, with his original letter, and that's sort of when things exploded for me, because I was dumb enough to say, it looks credible, it needs to be investigated. I didn't know if it was true. I didn't know what it was. But one of his motivations was, he says, I'm not a young man. I'm not here forever. And I think that's where, again, it comes down to, I believe that there's a heaven and a hell. I believe that we are destined for eternity with God, but we can make the wrong choice. And there's some that kind of say, well, and even, when I was in the seminary, the question of, does anybody really go to hell was sort of, I mean, I was in the seminary in the late 70s, early 80s. And certainly all of that was sort of being experimented with and questioned. But I think that certainly the church in the catechism and then in the deposit of faith that we've inherited clearly says hell is a reality, heaven is a reality. You've got to make your choice. God, I mean, the scriptures tell us in these recent weeks, God's mercy is abundant.
Yeah.
77 times we'll be forgiven. But we've got to acknowledge the sin and seek the forgiveness. And I think especially, and that's why I get into these. I mean, I've never met Father James Martin, and I was, sort of, I didn't use his name, but everybody knew who I was talking about. I'm sure that's part of the quote you were.
I'm gonna get to that. Yeah.
And
so, go ahead, Bishop.
He's altering what the church teaches. He needs to at least be honest with that. It's more of that subterfuge and sleight of hand, and he won't let himself be nailed down. I mean, he's smart. He's smarter than I am, but he's clever, but he's playing with the truth, and it harms people. You wouldn't believe, I mean, you probably would believe, but I've been contacted by a lot of people who thank me for speaking up about Father James Martin, because they've been down the path and they say he's selling a bill of goods.
I know it very well. I bought that, I bought into it. You also said at that 2018 USCCB meeting, I think we have to really take that question seriously, referring back to the McCarrick. It's part of our deposit of faith that we believe homosexual activity is immoral. The people, those that we label homosexual, are children of God, and they need our great care. But to me, that great care comes from acknowledging the sin and the reality that all of us are sinners, called from sin to virtue. I think the question with the McCarrick situation is, how did he get promoted? How did all that happen if we really all, if we really all are of one mind that this is wrong and sinful? Sorry for botching your quote there at the end. But I mean, you answered what I was going to ask you, and I think we don't all believe that. And you brought up James Martin. And I want to, but he's not the first bishop, and I'm sure to do these sort of mental gymnastics with the LGBT issue. John J. McNeil, in his 1976 book, The Church and the Homosexual, I was a little kid when it came out, but it was still eating people alive when I was gay in the 90s. That book was still going around. He was still alive. It's awful. I mean, I have a particular friend that I've written about quite a bit, who's no longer with us, but he was very influenced by John J. McNeil, and he ended up dying of AIDS later. So this is something that McNeil wrote. Since most gay people experience their homosexual orientation as part of creation, if they accept this church teaching, they must see God as sadistically creating them with an intrinsic orientation to evil. Most gays would prefer to see the church teaching as wrong rather than believe God is sadistic. I know, but this is exactly, not as explicitly, but this is exactly what James Martin is peddling, with differently ordered, and then also the God made you this way theory. He says God made you this way. God made you this way, over and over and over again. And it's very dangerous, because when you tell somebody, oh, God made you this way, then of course they're going to reject the teachings of the church.
Absolutely. And God made us to share everlasting life with him. We've all got disorders. I mean, you could say as sinners, we're all disordered. And I think that...
But our desires are not all disordered. A heterosexual desire that a man has for a woman in marriage is not disordered. But no matter how you package a same-sex desire for sexual relations with someone of the same sex, it's always disordered.
Yeah. Well, there are plenty of things that are disordered in human experience that, really bring harm to people. And I think that, we just live in a time where people, I love movie quotes, and it's like, we can't handle the truth.
Exactly.
Good old Jack Nicholson in, I think it was
A Few Good Men.
Gentlemen, or A Few Good Men, yeah. But we can't handle the truth. We need to embrace the truth and believe that, yeah, there's concupiscence. We live in a sinful, broken world. We believe in original sin. And, the tragedy of letting the homosexual orientation masquerade as virtuous, or the acting out of it. I mean, the orientation is neutral, but the living that lifestyle is masquerading as virtuous. It really brings harm to those individuals. And in the mystery of God's plan, I mean, and people point to historically, I mean, people speculate that Michelangelo was homosexual. I don't know, maybe he was. And I think where the leap is, because they're gifted, then they should be able to live out this orientation in whatever way they choose. And I think that God's plan is something really much more beautiful than that, much more nuanced than that. And we just sort of run roughshod over, what is God calling for this? I mean, some point to David and Jonathan in the Old Testament. Oh, they must have had a homosexual relationship.
Oh, they do it all the time.
And I think that that's something that's been lost in all of this, is for two men to have a deep love for each other and friendship, that can be a blessing. But when it becomes sexually, physically active, it gets messed up. It's just not where that's supposed to go. Same thing with two women.
Yeah. I don't want to get too much in the weeds with you, Bishop, but is the condition like neutral, as you said? Because I mean, it is a propensity towards an intrinsic moral evil.
Well, yeah.
So,
but I guess neutral in the sense of any culpability.
Right.
If you don't act on it, you're not just a sinner just because you have an orientation.
Yeah. Where I got into, just personally, between you and I and everybody who's listening, but where I got into an issue is, even when I did embrace chastity and was not chaste, the inclination or the desire was still there.
Sure.
And that was something I think the church doesn't talk about. That I think chastity is just one point. I think the next point is dealing with the inclination and the desire.
Yeah. And
I think it's important, because
that's above my pay grade and all that.
Sorry. This is also what you said, Bishop, at that 2018 meeting. You wrote, or you said, I'm sorry. Brothers, I think part of the fraternal correction or the fraternal support we offer each other is to say, can that be presented in our diocese? And you're referring back to James Martin. That same-sex marriage is just fine, and the church will one day grow to understand that. That's not what we teach. And I thought it was ironic, and I'm not going to pick on anybody because I'm just a layman. I can't. But it was ironic that one of the people you were addressing on the stage was Archbishop Gomez from LA, because every year James Martin is a headline speaker at the Los Angeles Religious Education Congress, and he gives these very long speeches on the LGBT issue. So it's ironic that you are saying this to somebody that really, it's madness. It's the only way I could describe it, is that here you are. Because I've actually spoke to Archbishop Gomez in person and said, this cannot sustain itself. You cannot have this stuff going on where, and Martin is not the only one, just for example, at that conference. But
how does he respond?
By the audience?
No, Archbishop. I mean, how did he respond when you
Well,
said?
like most bishops do, they hold their cards very close. They don't say anything, or they say, "Oh, thank you. Yeah, I'll look into this." They don't. That's the answer I've gotten every time. But a lot of people think, "Oh, the LA rec is kooky," and it is. But it is the largest gathering of Catholics in the United States, and you have a lot of DREs and CCD teachers that go there from throughout the country. They get filled up with all this poison, and then they go back to their diocese and disseminate it.
Yeah.
And they're telling Catholic teachers there, that children as young as 7 years old can identify as LGBT. And you need to go back to your diocese, identify these vulnerable children who are a lot of times maybe alienated from other kids. We don't know what's going on at home.
Yeah.
And then you need to identify them, gain their friendship, and confirm them in an LGBT identity. It's just madness.
It's just, it is madness. What used to be called madness is now promoted as sanity, and it's harmful. It's harmful to the human community, and it's harmful to the individual. So, I think as a bishop, I have an obligation to speak that truth and to speak out. And it's not politically correct to stand up and have all these archbishops and cardinals, and
but it's the
I'm
truth.
just
the truth.
Yeah.
And,
I'm a bishop in Tyler, and it's like, what's he talking about?
and Bishop, I want to end it. I wish I could talk to you longer, but I've been hanging on a thread staying in the Catholic Church, and I know you think you're just out in the boondocks of Texas, but it means a lot. A bishop like you, just certain priests. I know a lot of times they don't know if it's reaching people, but it is. And I know so many people that are struggling with this issue in the church, because the luminaries in the church, and the very powerful, they don't see them sticking up for them or speaking the truth. They see them doing the exact opposite.
A final thing that I would say is a guiding rule for all of us. The scriptures say the truth shall set you free. And that, I would encourage anyone listening that's battling some of the aspects of this, keep seeking the truth. Keep seeking the truth, because that's where the freedom is. And it's not easy. Doesn't make everything just suddenly fall into place and, my life's just simple now. But that gives you the freedom to really live and to flourish, as Saint Irenaeus says, God's glory is man fully alive. And we come fully alive when we know the truth, and it sets us free to be fully alive. So that is my prayer, and we've got to speak up for the truth. And politically correct, it's almost a guarantee these days, if it's politically correct, it's not the truth. And so be politically incorrect, and you may be on the path to truth.
Right. Could you offer me a blessing, and anybody who's listening,
Sure.
Give a blessing to all of us? Thank you,
Sure.
Bishop.
The Lord be with you.
With your spirit.
Almighty God, we ask your blessing for everyone who may be listening to this, that they may be uplifted and strengthened in your grace and love. And we ask this in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen.
God bless you, Bishop Strickland. Thank you so much. Thank you.
God bless, Joseph. Sorry I have to run.